today's op-ed over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled "The Seventh Generation Amendment: The Blah 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 Has to End," and it starts out with a little YouTube clip from a group that I support on Patreon, Juice Media, where it's about the net zero by 2050 that came out of the COP26. And basically what they're pointing out is that we're all saying we're going to just procrastinate a couple of decades and then all of a sudden we'll do something. And what that's going to do is it's really going to make us deeply, deeply, deeply in climate trouble, far worse than we are right now. And in the article I point out that, you know, and by the way, there's this brilliant new book out that informed much of my thinking on this. It's called The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity, by Graeber and Wengrow. But, you know, what I point out is that when you go back and you look at history, at the history of the human race, you discover that, according to Graeber and Wengrow, and Graeber, by the way, was a guest on this program. He just died last year at a young age, too, a very tragic thing, but just a brilliant thinker. He wrote the B.S. Jobs book also. We had him on about that. But in any case, you go back and you look at this anthropology and archaeology, and you discover that between 25,000 years ago and 7,000 years ago, depending on what part of the world you're talking about, in many cases, not in all cases, but in many cases, people stopped being hunter-gatherers and started being pastoralists, you know, herders, and agriculturalists, farmers. And along with those changes, along with settling down, came the massive destruction of local ecosystems. I mean, just absolutely massive. 10 to 12,000 years ago, just in North America, 57 major species of mammals went extinct. In the, you know, evolutionarily speaking, in the blink of an eye. We saw the same, and this is the giant woolly mammoth, the saber-toothed tiger, the mastodons, the giant bears and sloths, the lumbering glyptodons, wild ancestors of camels and horses. We also saw the exact same thing happen, but not 12,000 years ago. See, the major story that was told was, oh, that was the end of the Ice Age. It was climate change that killed those animals. Turns out it wasn't, because similar extinctions happened in Australia at a completely different time, in New Zealand at a completely different time, in the Pacific Islands, just a mere 1,000 years ago, Hawaii, British New Caledonia, many of these islands, exact same thing. All the large local edible animals got wiped out. Why? Well, it was because humans showed up. And what you find when you dig into the indigenous cultures that are still extant, you know, people who still remember the old oral traditions of their societies, when you dig into those cultures, literally all over the world, you find these stories of how important it is to make decisions in the context of future generations. Because these people made decisions based in the context of, oh, there's food, we can eat it. And they ended up causing local extinctions, ruining their local environments. In New Zealand, for example, you know, 800 to 900 years ago, it got so bad, they ate 50 different species of moa birds, ranging from ones the size of ostriches down to ones the size of chickens, completely eliminated them from the island. Then they ate all the small mammals, and then they ate things like frogs and reptiles. They fished out the waters. And pretty soon they started eating each other. I mean, there was a brief period there. And this, by the way, happens in pretty much every culture. They go through this period where after they wipe everything out, people become very warlike and start attacking each other. And by the way, that is happening all around the world right now, and it's coming for all of us if we continue down this path. And then you look at, you know, for example, the same Melanesian people who were the Maori in New Zealand were also the British New Caledonians. They just arrived about 500 years earlier. And when Captain Cook showed up there in the 1770s, he said, these are the happiest people I've ever met. Why? Because they had gone through this cultural transformation and decided we're not going to destroy our environment anymore. We're going to make decisions based on what happens to our children's grandchildren. The one that we all know about, you know, it's famous in American mythology or history, really, is the Iroquois Confederacy. and their great law that every decision must be made in the context of its impact on the seventh generation from today. And I get it that, it seems kind of all new agey to, hey, let's listen to what the Indians said. But the fact of the matter is that every indigenous society in the world has these kinds of stories about when they wiped out their local environment and what an idiotic mistake it was. Well, now we're making the exact same mistake as a human race, only we're doing it with the whole friggin' planet, which is like a whole different scale. This, by the way, is not something that was new to the founders of our republic. This is not just, hey, some anthropologists or Hartmann just discovered this. No, this has been around for a long, long time. In my article here, I've got Jefferson, Adams, and Franklin quoting the Native Americans and talking about them in this context. So I'm proposing an amendment to our Constitution, or at the very least a law. Congress can pass laws that are fairly strong. They're not as powerful as constitutional amendments, but one or the other. Let's call it the 28th Amendment, and it says, now this is, of course, my rough draft, and if you're a lawyer or constitutional scholar and you have a better way of saying or doing this, I'd love to hear it. Congress shall make no law respecting any development of land, use of natural resources, or permitting or regulation of business activity that does not first demonstrate conclusively that the outcome or impact of that development or law on the seventh generation will be either beneficial or at the very worst benign. Because frankly, I'm telling you, the blah, blah, blah about fossil fuels has to end. If it doesn't, our children, our grandchildren are screwed. I mean, it's just the future is going to be a hellscape. And I think that this should become our culture's new great law.